Hello, AP World History students. Mrs. Mathers here, picking up with part 3 of chapter 19. As you can see from this map, the Qing's ruling area was rather large. From 1644 to 1941, the Qing dynasty, who were from Manchuria, which is the northern part of China or north of China proper, were the ruling dynasty. Now, we've got a couple of really important things happening in China at this time. First of all, we have a European world that wants to trade with China. They want to get things like tea and silk and porcelain because China is the best at it. But remember, China is really isolationist and they have enough people to work all of the crops and do all of the things that they need. So they don't have to trade with the rest of the world, but the rest of the world wants to trade with China. So what does Europe do, especially British? The British says, hey, you know what? There's one way that we can really get the Chinese dependent on trade with us, and that's to get them addicted to opium. Now, as you may or may not know, opium, which is the derivative behind drugs like morphine and heroin and fentanyl, all similar in chemical structure, is extremely addictive. People say that they get addicted after merely one use. Now, this drug, opium, comes from the seemingly harmless poppy plant that we get our poppy seeds from. But nevertheless, we have a huge number of people in China that become addicted to opium. In fact, they're willing to do anything to get opium. So this led to both economic and drug addiction problems, with something like 30% of the Chinese court officials actually being addicted to opium. And so they are willing to trade their precious goods and their luxury items for the mere purpose of staying addicted. This is a picture of an opium factory in India. So the British actually grew the poppies in India where they grow naturally. Also in Pakistan and Afghanistan, there are large poppy fields even to this day that can produce heroin and other opiates. The opiate den on the bottom right is a very classic picture of what happens to people when they're on opium. They smoke it from an ivory pipe and they breathe it into their lungs, where it takes a hold really, really quickly, and it leads one into sort of this state of blissful ignorance. They don't really know what's going on around them. All they know is that they feel this sense of bliss because it activates a neurotransmitter in the brain called endorphins. The opium addict also often sold his possessions to pay for his opium. This is a woodcut from the days of the opium trade, and a man is actually selling his wife. She does not want to go, but he's selling his wife in order to support his opium addiction. That's how bad it was. This next picture is a picture of the British coming to the coast of China, trying to sell their wares. Now, we'll talk in a little bit about how the government of China tried to resist. You see a cross up here. We've got Christianity in here as well. We have people with swords and shields. These are the Chinese. And then, of course, we have the Europeans with their guns and their bayonets on their guns. They're going to win. And they're going to win this war. And the war is called, very appropriately, the Opium Wars. So China is getting a lot of external pressure to open up her ports and to open up her land to Europeans, and they are willing to go to war for it. The British are willing to go to war for it. Now, Lin Zexu is a popular hero in China. I've heard that there are statues of him in various places in China, including in Nanjing. He actually attempts to stop the opium trade. What he does is he arrests people that are running the opium dens. The opium is delivered to these drug dealers in balls, and they're like wrapped in like a fabric, like a linen, these huge balls like the size of a soccer ball. And I've actually seen videos of the Chinese officials dumping the balls into the Grand Canal and then putting lye in to deactivate the active ingredients in the opium. And so this is really an important thing for the Chinese. They don't want everyone to be addicted to opium. But, the British just say, no, we want to keep trading in opium. So they destroyed the Grand Canal in retaliation. So what those ships represent is they went into the Grand Canal and they started just shooting cannons into the Grand Canal. As you can imagine, this was going to be a very bad situation for the Chinese because, after all, that was a major north-south conduit for commerce, for agriculture, for communication. And so the Chinese ended up falling into concessions, and we call these the unequal treaties. The unequal treaties really allowed the British and then eventually other Europeans to do a lot of things in China that they weren't able to do prior to the Opium Wars. So the Treaty of Nanjing was signed in 1842. Nanjing, China is, I'm trying to find it on the map here. Hopefully you can find it. It's sort of in a very populated area of China. So it was British. They had the right to maintain the opium trade. Okay, so if you stop shooting up the Grand Canal, you can trade in opium. Secondly, you can have most favored nation status. So what does that mean? That means that, oh, well, yes, we will have free trade with the Chinese. And your people that are in China, we're not going to hold them very accountable if they break laws. Secondly, we're actually going to give you Hong Kong, okay, for 150 years. So Hong Kong is now considered an autonomous region of China. But in 1992, and I remember this very, very well, there was a lot of Western investment in Hong Kong because it was being controlled by the British. It went back to the Chinese in 1992, but the Cantonese people in Hong Kong were very much used to pretty much self-rule at that point. Okay, here's Nanjing, by the way. 5 trade ports were open. Remember, they had only 2, and now we've got 5 that open up as a result of the Treaty of Nanjing. The British got exemption from Chinese laws, in other words, extraterritoriality that we talked about with the Ottomans, and how the Europeans got that as well. So they're subject to the laws of their own nations, but they're not subject to the laws of the Chinese. This treaty allowed Christian missionaries. Now, we have been talking a lot about the Jesuits and how important they were in Latin America, but in China, we're getting more of the Protestant missionaries. The Dutch and other Protestant groups are just like knocking at the door of China. They really, really want to get in. The Great Commission that Christians feel very strongly about was something that they felt very strongly about, and this treaty allowed Chinese missionaries that are Christian, rather, missionaries to come into China. By the year 1900, China had lost control of the economy and had actually lost 90 ports to foreign powers. So 90, that is a lot of ports. And so the Qing dynasty wasn't really hanging on very well, and China was being overrun by Europeans who were very interested in what China had to offer. So what then happens is something called the Taiping Rebellion. There is internal dissent with what is going on. In fact, this man here, Hong Xiuquan, he is not, he is, first of all, a very religious man, and he is Christian. He is Christian. This is really important to keep in mind. But it's also a political movement. So you cannot separate the two when it comes to the rise of the Taiping. In fact, I've been reading this, or I've read this book a couple of times now, God's Chinese Son, which is about Hong Xiuquan and the rise of the Taiping and the Taiping Rebellion. So the people in China, especially in Cantonese China and the southern China at this time, were extremely impoverished. The Qing dynasty was completely ignoring their needs. They had strained resources from population growth. So while population growth is generally a good thing and can help an economy, because they had not had really technological advances, they didn't have some of the technology that other areas had that could handle the population growth. The government was extremely corrupt, being run by the mandarins and by the eunuchs. And again, a lot of people were able to buy influence in the Qing court. Drug addiction was a huge problem across China. And the Taiping held staged four major rebellions from 1850 to 1864, including in Nanjing and in Beijing. And these were major. We're not talking little, we're talking huge. The leader, Huang Zhiquan, that you see right there, he has an extended illness. He had also, in his early life, been exposed to Christianity through missionaries. The missionaries had a Bible translated into Chinese, and he spoke Cantonese, which the Chinese, whether you speak Cantonese or Mandarin, you're reading the same thing. The Bible included a handful of stories: Adam and Eve, Noah's Ark, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Han Zhiquan first of all, was very poor. He knew about the abuses of the Europeans towards the Chinese after the Opium Wars. He was well aware of that. He was aware of prostitution that was going on widespread with the Europeans and Chinese women, as well as other abuses happening within China. After he was sick for a long time, I think, having a background in psychology, something happened in his brain, and he began to believe that he was actually the brother of Jesus, or God's second son, or as this book would say, God's Chinese son. So he really truly believed that. He believed that he was part of the Godhead, and that Jesus came before him, and that he was the next, incarnation of God. He was very charismatic, and by 1850, he easily had 30,000 followers that believed that China should become Christian. In fact, it was the Kingdom of Heavenly Peace is what his kingdom was called. Or what he called his kingdom, or the Kingdom of Heavenly Great Peace. His visions, so he also had visions, along with this belief that he was the brother of Jesus, commanded him to purify China of the demons. Now, he literally believed the Manchu Qing dynasty. Remember, the Qing dynasty were Manchurians. He believed that they were demons, just like one might read about demons in a Christian Bible. And he believed that China needed to become Christian, a Protestant Christian, not Catholic Christian. This is a picture of one of the attacks, and as you can see, there are fires, there are people, and the rebellion took on major proportions as they started attacking some of the Qing dynasty controlled areas. Now, interestingly, the Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace was not very peaceful in their attacks. Here's what they did call for: an end to the Qing dynasty. Qing dynasty must end. Radical social change. And obviously, this was a result of a reaction to the wealth of the Qing, as well as the abuse of the Europeans. So they called for no private property, and the end to foot binding, and the end to concubinage. The Taiping were finally defeated in Nanjing with the help of European weapons, which would, of course, include gunpowder weapons, in 1864. The thing to keep in mind here, and this is so important, this was the most deadly rebellion in the history of the world. 20 to 30 million lives were lost throughout the period of the Taiping Rebellion. Huang Zhiquan himself committed suicide after the 1864 loss. I don't know that anyone knows really what was on his mind or why he committed suicide at that time, but I'm sure it had become quite clear to him that this wasn't going to work out. This kingdom, Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace, was not going to happen in China. This blue point here, the most deadly rebellion in the history of the world. I really want you to remember that, because I think a lot of people don't know about the Taiping Rebellion, and I want you to know about it. So what happens after the Taiping? Well, China, the Qing dynasty has really pretty much lost their control almost completely. The foreign powers seize and divide the Chinese tributary states. And as you can see here, we have the orange is Russia, the pink is Great Britain. You can see Nanjing and Shanghai are in that area. The Germans are in the blue, French in the green, so they're going to be closer to Southeast Asia. And then the Japanese actually take over parts of China as well. And they will continue to hold on to parts of China in the years following 1900 and into and through World War II. So the Qing, they're like, whoa, okay, I guess we need to have some reforms. So this lovely lady here, Empress Dowager Shiji, well, it initiates the self-strengthening movement. So this is a local government plan to strengthen China economically and militarily. They decided to adopt some European technology. What you see there are actually some cannons, and you see some cannonballs. And if you go to China, you can see on some of the walls the European cannons situated on the walls to help them defend themselves. They want to establish their customs. Chinese, they want to be self-sufficient, and they also want to industrialize, but the empire is still sort of resistant to that fact. So Empress Dowager Cixi, who is pictured here, is actually basically controlled China for a number of years, almost till the end of the Qing dynasty. Because of all these changes, Chinese traditions were threatened, and this wasn't popular, of course, with Empress Dowager Cixi, who wanted to continue the Chinese traditions. So we have a lot of conflict going on. Do we want to change China? Don't we want to change China? So some additional reforms occur. Now, this is Empress Dowager Cixi here. I assume these are not her real fingernails, that they're actually like things that they put on. But you know, she was a tough woman. I'm not really sure. So she instituted the 100 Days of Reform in 1898. Local reformers proposed more radical forms of reform. They want the constitutional monarchy. So they want Empress Dowager Cixi or any emperor who follows to have a constitution that they must follow. They want to institute European systems of education, military, and economic development. But it was a short-lived movement. So Cixi actually imprisoned the emperor, killed the reformers, and the reforms were reversed. And I think I mistakenly said this was instituted by the Empress Dowager Cixi. That was not the case for this one. These were other reformers that tried to institute 100 days of reform. Now, 100 days is a sort of a marker time period. Even the President of the United States, they look to the first 100 days in office, and they often sort of highlight their achievements of the first 100 days. So again, threats to the existing Chinese political, social, and economic order. Some people just don't like that. So then what do we have? We have the Boxer Rebellion. Yes, those are heads that have been chopped off and they're being piled up. The Boxer Rebellion was an anti-foreign movement. Now keep in mind that there are foreigners living throughout China at this period of time. Cixi supports this. She supports this particular movement. They're called the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists. In other words, the Boxers. That's why they are called. This is called the Boxer Rebellion. The purpose, again, sort of like going back to Hong Xiuquan, is to rid the country of the evil foreigners. Although Hong Xiuquan thought the Qing dynasty were the evil demons. So what they did was they actually attacked European embassies, they killed foreigners, and they killed Chinese Christians, because according to them, the Chinese Christians were not truly following the ways of China. European forces, with their modern weapons, and the U.S. gets involved, retaliate and crush the Boxers. And in the end of this all, and these are some of the Boxers that were beheaded here, China was forced to accept the stationing of foreign troops within China. Um, the Qing dynasty would collapse in 1912, and the China would enter a period of warring states, sort of again, warlord era. Also, though, a couple of ideas are starting to rise in China. One of them is called the Nationalists or the Kuomintang, which was led by Chiang Kai-shek, and we'll talk about him later. And the other would be the communist ideas, sort of Marx and Engels ideas, but in a Chinese version, and that would be led by Mao Zedong and other communists. The movie, The Last Emperor, is actually about the last emperor of China. His name was Puyi. Puyi continued to live in the imperial city, which you can see in the background of this picture. The emperor does die a mysterious and sudden death, and then Cixi, so she's married to the emperor, right? But so she's the emperor dies one day later in November of 1908. The heir to the throne is 2-year-old Puyi. So Puyi takes the throne, but he has a caretaker who is actually going to, rule in his place, because obviously he's 2, he can't rule. There is a revolution in 1911. Puyi abdicated the throne in 1912. However, he did end up living as a puppet emperor through World War II in the Forbidden City. And that is also an interesting thing to take note of, that the family wasn't immediately kicked out of the imperial city. They were able to stay in the imperial city. So that's an interesting piece of history. And I just made this just in case you missed class. So anyways, hope you have a great day. I think this is fascinating, and I'll see you soon. Bye.